I'm going to read, I have my three main characters, and Charlie is a mixed-race girl of great beauty and elegance, and she leaves drama school, as girls do sometimes. Certainly in my year there was one. And immediately she has an agent, and immediately there's a buzz. And actually that's an interesting trajectory for an actor, because other problems, as we learn later in the book with Charlie, come when you've instantly been successful, and then there's, you've got everything to prove. And Charlie has a boyfriend who's already an actor, successful, working, older than her. And he's in a West End production of Hedda Gabler. I'm just giving you the scene. She has just had a call from her agent to say they're sending round some scenes, and she's got her first film audition. So I'm just going to read a little bit from this section of Charlie's sort of first foray into the professional business. Okay, oh, I might just get some water. I think this is fizzy. We'll see. Okay. Charlie arrived at the theatre early. She nodded to the man who sat inside the little booth and stood in the narrow corridor, listening to the last scenes of Hedda Gabler echoing out through the tannoy. The tension was building, that poor woman, spiraling into despair, and then Rob's voice as Tesman, sending a shiver through her as once again he failed to understand his wife. Charlie heard the rustle of skirts as Hedda sat at the piano, and the raucous notes of a polka as she crashed up and down on the keys. There was Tesman again, telling her off, and the false tone of acquiescence as Hedda demurred. I shall be silent in future. By the time the shot rang out, Charlie felt her nerves ready to snap. For a moment there was silence, then the gasps and shudders of the audience, before Rob began to wail. To hear that sound, that keening, wounded cry of sorrow, had Charlie transfixed, her eyes pinned to the mesh box of the tannoy, her breath held, so that it shocked her when the applause rose up and rattled in her ears. Good show tonight. Actors were pounding down the stairs. They must have had their clothes on underneath their costumes, or the lure of the pub was enough to put a spring into their step that was sometimes lacking, at least Rob claimed, when they were on stage. That sounded good. Charlie waited while Rob posed for a photo with 3 Italian teenagers and signed an autograph for a lone man who had not seen the play. Fucking rubbish, Rob huffed, the smile dropping from his face as soon as they were out of earshot. God, that little bitch Jessica gets more tricky every night. You should have seen what she was getting up to, some business with a ball of wool right in the middle of my big scene with Hedda. Well, I only heard the last 10 minutes, but it gave me goosebumps, honestly. It was so good. Even stage door Stan looked moved. No, really? He had tears in his eyes. Don't push it, Rob was laughing. And arm in arm, friends again, they walked through Chinatown and into Covent Garden, not even stopping to discuss where they were going, striding across the square, turning off down a quiet street that Charlie felt was theirs, and in through the secret, thrilling door of Joe Allen's. Good evening to you both, the head waiter welcomed them warmly, and it occurred to Charlie, as they breezed after him through the maze of tables, that for the first time tonight, it was her good luck that they were marking. The Pages arrived the next day. The first scene was on a train. A young girl, Celestina, off to work as an au pair, meets a French boy and falls into conversation. They talk, they flirt, they are drawn compellingly towards each other. The scene was full of awkward pauses, misunderstood English, flirtatious glances. Just reading through it made Charlie smile, and almost all her lines were in English. This is my stop. Sorry, I suppose I'd better get off. The girl jumps down onto the platform, but when she turns to wave, she finds the boy has jumped off after her. The second scene was very short. There were the 2 characters lie by a smouldering fire, their clothes in disarray, the sound of waves lapping on the nearby shore. Don't go back. I have to. You don't have to do anything except stay here with me. They begin to kiss. But about my university, my degree? What about life? He looks at her in the moonlight. Yes, life. They kiss again, more passionately. The fire flickers. Big heat. "You can't do this. It's porn," Rob said when he'd read the scenes. "Don't be fooled by that your old euphemism, big heat. It means full-on nudity and fucking." "It does not," she scowled. "It's art. It's French, mostly. And the director, his last film was about the poet Victor Hugo." "Well," Rob's face was dark, "you probably won't get it anyway." And that night in bed, he kept the light on and read his Bukowski novel, flicking the pages noisily until long after Charlie was ready to sleep. The meeting went well. The casting director greeted her enthusiastically, and the director, a small, shadowy Frenchman in a polo neck sweater, watched her keenly as she read. "Very nice," he said, nodding. "Very nice." Maisie was ecstatic when she called. "They loved you," she gushed. "They want to see you again for some camera tests, and this time to read with the boy they've cast, Marcel Perez. He's a bit of a star in France. Are you free next week on Monday?" "Sure," Charlie said, and she turned to check that Rob was out of earshot before asking if she could get hold of the whole script. I don't know," Maisie sounded distracted. "They've only sent these scenes through for now. They're probably still working on it, so 2 o'clock on Monday, same place. Call me the minute you get out." That Saturday, it was Rob's last night. Charlie went in early and sat in the dressing room, listening to the voices magnified, telling the story with pure sound. She closed her eyes and felt the whole tragic world of Norway, of Ibsen, of lies, ambition, and hopelessness descend upon her. Oh, how could they bear it, these actors, every night, spinning out the same sad story? But even as she thought this, she could hear, too, that they'd found new meaning in the lines. Probably not cut out for the theatre, she decided. Maybe I'll concentrate on film. And snapping open her eyes, she caught sight of her face in the mirror and laughed briefly to imagine for a moment she'd be lucky enough to choose. Charlie stood up and looked at the cards stuck onto the mirror, the flowers, some fresh, others drooping, the towels and books and assorted makeup, the little pot of black powder Barry used to fill in the bald spot on the back of his head. He had a photo of his children and a card from one of them. "Good luck, Daddy, break a leg," with a drawing of a man hopping happily across the stage. Every night after the show, Barry rushed to catch the train to Brighton, arriving around midnight, cycling his bike through the deserted streets to Hove. "It's worth it," he said, "just to smell the sea air and be there when the kids wake up in the morning." And Charlie knew that if she had Rob's baby, if she moved anywhere for sea air, she'd never see him again. Charlie waited until the famous shot rang out. The audience began gasping, and then she slipped out of the dressing room and down the stairs to stand in the little corridor beside Stan's booth. They both kept their heads down as Rob wept for the last time. And when the play ended, she imagined the audience up on its feet, exalted. The clapping was so loud it hurt her ears. There was a party afterwards at a bar in Holborn for the cast, the stage management, the director, and assorted friends. The actress who played Hedda, Sally Warren, arrived weighed down with flowers. "Oh, my darling!" She clasped her arms around Rob's neck, and Charlie understood why it was that actors talked with such intensity. How could you not say "darling" when you journeyed through a lifetime with a person, bared your soul, wept tears, exchanged kisses, borne heartache, reached the heights of unimagined bliss? Why would you shake hands somberly when you'd once died in their arms? "We'll keep in touch," they promised each other. "Yes, we must." Charlie took a glass of wine from a passing tray. "Cheers." She leant into Rob. "You sounded amazing tonight. And you too." Sally Warren was beside him. "You were incredible." Sally raised her own glass. "Congratulations to you too. Rob tells me you have your first screen test coming up." Charlie glanced at Rob. Yes, I'm not sure." "That's right." Rob rested his arm heavily on her shoulder. "She's going to be a big star." He looked balefully across at her, and with a knowing smile, Sally moved away. "Oh, for God's sake," Charlie turned to Rob. "Why do you have to tell everyone? I probably won't get it." "Everyone will know soon enough." He had her arms in a tight hold. "When you're down in the earth by the smouldering fire with your kit off and some French bloke humping you from behind." "Rob!" Charlie looked around, but no one seemed to have heard. The room was filling up. A trail of men and women in white shirts was circling, heavy round platters of canapes held aloft. Starving actors descended on them. "Oh, shit." Charlie felt her stomach flip. She turned her back to the room. "Don't look, but it's Gabriel Grant," From drama arts? You remember, Pierre was obsessed with him, and Patrick Barry was convinced he was the great white hope of British theatre. He's handing out snacks. She turned to check, hoping that maybe she'd imagined it, but Gabriel, oblivious, was heading straight towards her. Where? Which one? Rob strained to see, and at that moment, Gabriel's eyes met hers. A sort of shudder washed over him, the physical embodiment of shame. But it was too late to look away. Hey, she waved. Hi, how are you? Great. Gabriel lowered his tray. There was one squashed cherry tomato on it, piped round with a swirl of cream. Charlie took it, and with a sigh, he let his tray drop to his side. I'm, just up for a few things. Oh, it's a fucker, though, trying to get work worth doing. And the agents, I had a few circling at the end of the drama school, but then, or maybe I was too choosy, I don't know. The whole thing's nonsense. Charlie nodded. I know, it's ridiculous. And you? He looked at her pityingly. You're out now, in the big, bad world. Yep, as of last Thursday. You know Nell Gilby got her equity card. Did you hear? Playing a penguin in a theatre in education tour. He made a pained expression. Yeah, that's right. Charlie refused to react. I saw her. She had an image of Nell, trilling operatically, her arms flapping as she fell forward in a rolling dive, while children aged from 4 to 7 lit up with delight. Actually, she was rather good. Well, I'd better get going. Gabriel glanced over his shoulder, work to do, and grimacing, he set off through the crowd towards the swing door where identical white-shirted figures were emerging with new trays. Rob was still at the bar, deep in conversation with the director. Their heads were close together, and although Charlie stood nearby, there was no way in without an interruption. She took another glass of wine and wandered off, keeping her eyes fixed on the middle distance, unable to bear the thought of another agonizing chat with Gabriel, until it occurred to her that other people's last night parties were a club that could not be broken into, a place you would never belong. She slid her glass onto a passing tray and stepped out into the street. The night was clear and soft, the pavement, the grey granite of the buildings breathing warmth. Fuck it, she thought, looking up at the dreary details of the night bus, and she stuck her arm out for a taxi home. Marcel Perez was young and slight, with gleaming jet-black hair. He took hold of Charlie's hand and didn't let it go. Let's rehearse, he said in his beautiful, lazy accent, quick, while they set up. The director and the cameraman were busy with a monitor, and the casting director was on the phone. Charlie pulled out her pages. You didn't learn? Marcel looked alarmed. Oh, well, yeah, I did, sort of. Perfect. He flung her script away. And if you forget, just invent, no? He looked around comically. Is all right. The writer is not here. They rattled through the lines, watching each other, looking away, smiling in spite of themselves, so that by the time Charlie was ready to get off that train, she would have been surprised to turn and find Marcel was not there. It is instant, Marcel looked intently at her. Is this attraction? No? Oui, Charlie agreed, and they laughed, a shivery, nervous laugh. The second scene was more difficult. They sat on the ground. Marcel stretched out and warmed his hands on an imaginary fire. Okay, the director called. We'll film this one when you are both ready. Don't go back. Marcel took hold of Charlie's hands. I have to. All Charlie could think was, are they actually going to kiss? You don't have to do anything except stay here with me. His hand was on her face, pushing back her hair, and he was leaning forward. Oh, for God's sake. She closed her eyes and felt his mouth for a brief second, soft against her lips. But what about university, my degree? She spluttered. Had she broken off too soon? Marcel looked startled. He sat back on his heels. What about life? He insisted. They stared at each other. She could hear a clock tick on the wall. Yes, life, she conceded, swallowing. And Marcel moved towards her again, and slowly, with his arms around her, he began to lean her backwards so that gently, elegantly, they both sank down to the ground. The big heat, he whispered, and she answered in her best clipped brief encounter's voice. I say, you're awfully good. Do you do this sort of thing often? They collapsed, shaking and holding each other, while the camera kept on running, and the director gazed at their laughing, love-struck faces on the screen. Thank you.